Hi, this is Mrs. Chavez. Today we're going to be looking at formal and informal arguments. We're going to first look at informal logical fallacies. Now, there are 5 fallacies that deal with arguments which focus on people or groups. Now, these arguments attempt to discredit an individual or a group rather than focus on the issue at hand. You hear these a lot when you hear the arguments of politicians, oftentimes.
All you hear in the current campaign is we need someone in Washington who's not a professional politician. But the people making that claim are lobbyists and politicians. So much for that claim.
This is what we call an ad hominem. That's an attack on the person. An ad hominem actually means, in Latin, it means against the man. So this fallacy involves attacking the person who's arguing and not his or her argument, shifting the focus away from the arguer's reasons to the arguer's personality. And we sometimes call it an abusive argument. Another argument that we look at is the appeal to tradition. This is when you question traditional practices on the grounds that they've become outdated. Society is in some sense supposed to be progressing. It's supposed to be moving on from the traditional to more modern. So it's justifying a practice, though, because it's a tradition. It's not an appropriate appeal because the tradition itself is being called into question. The next one we're going to be looking at is called attack on the motive. So when an argument attacks the credibility of a person or a group on the grounds that the person or group has biases or motives that are being perceived as the real reason for their views, then the argument is attacking these biases or motives. Sometimes there are situations, though, with an identifiable bias or motive, and they may offer a logical and convincing argument.
The Republicans say we should shrink the deficit and cut down government spending. But these are the same people who cranked up the deficit by getting us into 2 wars simultaneously. These are the same people who cranked up the deficit by giving tax breaks to the rich. These are the same people who gave us the Bush years of massive spending, which was more than any other administration from either party.
That is an attack on the motive. I'm attacking the motive of the person who is bringing forth the argument instead of the argument itself. The bandwagon argument, or the appeal to popularity. This is an appeal to what's accepted by many, if not most people. But remember, the majority can often be wrong. I don't know if your mother ever told you this, but if my mother used to say things like, if your friend jumps off the bridge, are you going to jump off the bridge too? That kind of idea. You can see this fallacy also in advertising.
As you know, most European countries have abolished the death penalty, with Turkey being the only country in recent years to carry out the death sentence. So it's clear that the death penalty is immoral.
The straw man fallacy. This involves the misrepresentation of another person's argument. And this misrepresentation is usually a weaker argument, which is easier to knock. The next 5 arguments are fallacies that are going to focus on the structure of an argument and the way that the terms are used within the argument. We call these informal logical fallacies. The appeal to ignorance comes in one of 2 forms of argumentation. First, number 1, there is no evidence for the truth of P, so P must be false. There is no evidence for the falsehood of P, so P must be true. So the ignorance refers to the lack of evidence for something, which is used then to leap to the conclusion that the opposite is either true or it's false.
Many ships and planes disappeared in the region of the Bermuda Triangle, often without explanation, often without a physical trace. There must be some kind of mysterious force at work beneath the waves. No one knows exactly how the ancient pyramids were built. Why did the ancient South Americans, separated by thousands of miles, build pyramids just as the ancient Egyptians did? How did primitive peoples erect the mammoth pillars of Stonehenge? And how are the stones of Machu Picchu fitted so closely together that even a knife cannot slip between them? The answer is obviously the influence of ancient astronauts.
The next one is called begging the question, or the circular argument. So it's an inductive argument, and it uses the past experience and patterns to predict future events. So if you take a look at this little chart here on your left, the inductive argument works because this is, of course, an inductive argument, and inductive arguments have worked in the past, so they'll continue to work in the future. Why? Because inductive arguments work. As you can see, it's a complete circular pattern here. Equivocation is another form. Words get their meanings from the context in which they are being used. A slice of cucumber is better than nothing. Nothing is better than being in love. Therefore, a slice of cucumber is better than being in love. Can you understand the equivocation here? A loaded term is when it's used broadly or narrowly to drive a particular conclusion. Country X requires our economic support. It is a third world country, so it is our moral responsibility to give financial aid to the people. The slippery slope argument is an argument that if it's a tax or an action or a policy, because the action or policy would trigger a chain of events that would lead to a clearly undesirable result. How deep will the screening process become? If you allow this kind of intrusion into your personal life, it won't be long before you're asked for your papers while you're on your way to the store to buy milk. Next, we're going to look at formal logical arguments and fallacies. Hypothetical syllogism. So a hypothetical syllogism is a three-line argument that has as one of its premises a hypothesis in the form of if such and such is the case, then so and so will be true. There are two forms of hypothetical syllogisms, the modus ponens and the modus tollens. Let's look at the modus ponens first. Premise number one, if the mind and the body are separate, then there's a possibility of life after death. Premise number two, the mind and the body are separate. Conclusion, there's the possibility of life after death. You can understand that if the mind and the body are separate, then there is a possibility of life after death. Does that make sense? Obviously not. So the mind and body are separate. There is a possibility of life after death. Fallacy. Modus tollens. If our premise number one, if our political system is just, then there will be equality of opportunity. There is no equality of opportunity. Our political system is unjust. That makes more sense. Affirming the consequent. This argument is a faulty argument because the second premise should affirm the antecedent. That's the first premise to create a valid argument, but it affirms the consequent instead. Premise number one, if combustion occurs, P, then oxygen is present, Q. Oxygen is present, Q, combustion occurs. So what's it affirming? It's affirming the antecedent. The second premise should affirm the antecedent, and it's not. The disjunctive syllogism. Now, a disjunctive syllogism uses in one of its premises the disjunction or to connect two propositions into one compound proposition. At least one of the propositions is taken to be true. Premise number one, Sally either walked, that's P, or rode the bus, Q. Sally didn't walk, not P, so she rode the bus, Q. Affirming the disjunct. If there's one example found by assigning truth values to the propositions in which all the premises are true and the conclusion is false, then you have committed the fallacy of affirming the disjunct. Premise number 1, either the car battery is dead, P, or the car is out of gas, Q. The car battery is dead, P. Therefore, the car is not out of gas. Well, we all know that the battery could be dead and the car could be out of gas at the same time.